the final days of World War II, when Nazi Germany was collapsing from every direction, one of the strangest battles of the entire war took place inside an Austrian castle. American soldiers and German troops fought side by side, not against the Allies, not against the Red Army, but against the Waffen-SS. It sounds impossible. It sounds like something invented for a movie, but it happened. On May 5, 1945, only days before Germany's final surrender, a small group of American tankers, anti-Nazi German soldiers, Austrian resistance fighters, French political prisoners, and even a former SS officer defended Castle Itter against an attack by fanatical SS troops. This was not a battle for territory. It was not a battle that changed the outcome of the war by then. Hitler was already dead. Berlin had already fallen. The Third Reich was dying. But inside Castle Itter, the war was not over. For the people trapped inside, the danger was still real. The SS was still armed. The roads were still dangerous. And in the mountains of Austria, men who knew the war was lost were still willing to kill. Castle Itter stood in the Austrian Tyrol, near the village of Itter, surrounded by forests, hills, and mountain roads. Before the war, it had been a picturesque old castle, but under Nazi rule, it became something darker. It was taken over by the SS and turned into a special prison for important French prisoners. These were not ordinary prisoners of war. They were political trophies. Among them were former French prime ministers, military leaders, diplomats, and famous public figures. Édouard Daladier, the former prime minister of France, was held there. Paul Reynaud, another former French prime minister, was held there. General Maxime Weygand, once commander-in-chief of the French army, was imprisoned there. General Maurice Gamelin, another senior French commander, was also there. Jean Barotra, the famous tennis champion and former French minister of sport, was among the captives. So was Marie-Agnès de Gaulle, the sister of Charles de Gaulle. To the Nazis, these prisoners had value. They were hostages. They were bargaining chips. They were symbols of defeated France. But by May 1945, Nazi Germany no longer had a future. The system that had captured these people was falling apart, and that made the situation at Castle Itter more dangerous, not less. Because when a brutal regime collapses, its final moments can become unpredictable. Orders break down, guards panic, fanatics act on their own. Prisoners who were once useful can suddenly become witnesses, and witnesses can be killed. By early May, the SS guards at Castle Itter began to abandon their posts. Some fled, some disappeared. The prisoners found themselves in a strange position. They were no longer tightly guarded, but they were not truly free. Outside the castle walls, armed SS units still operated in the area. The roads were not safe. The nearest American forces were close, but not close enough. If the wrong SS unit reached the castle first, the prisoners could be massacred. So the prisoners had to act. They needed help, and they needed it fast. One of the first attempts came through a prisoner from Yugoslavia named Zvonimir Čuković, who had been used as a laborer at the castle. He managed to leave the castle under the excuse of running an errand. But instead of simply returning, he carried a message asking for help. He moved through dangerous territory and eventually reached American troops. Another man, Andreas Krobot, also left the castle carrying a message. His route took him toward the nearby town of Wurgel, and there the story took its first unbelievable turn. Because in Wurgel, the call for help reached a German officer. His name was Major Joseph Gangl. Gangl was an officer in the Wehrmacht, the regular German army, but by this stage of the war, he had turned against the Nazis. He was working with local Austrian resistance members and trying to protect civilians from SS reprisals. Wurgel had become dangerous. The SS was still active. The war was ending. But that did not mean the killing had stopped. For men like Gangl, the enemy was no longer the Americans. The enemy was the SS fanatics who wanted to continue violence even as Germany collapsed. When Gangl learned that high-value French prisoners were trapped at Castle Itter, he understood the danger. He also understood something else. His own force was too small to rescue them alone. So he made a decision that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. A German officer went to find the Americans. He approached them under a white flag. He surrendered himself, then he asked them for help. The American officer who responded was Captain John Jack Lee of the U.S. 12th Armored Division. Lee was a tough, aggressive officer, the kind of man who did not need long speeches when action was required. When he heard about the prisoners in the castle, he decided to go. But this was not a massive rescue operation. There was no full battalion, no huge armored column, no perfectly organized attack plan. Lee gathered a small force including American soldiers, a few tanks and vehicles, and Gangl's German troops. One of the tanks was a Sherman known as Besatten Jenny. Together, this strange force moved toward Castle Itter, Americans and Germans, former enemies now traveling together through a collapsing war zone to rescue French prisoners from the SS. The closer they came to the castle, the stranger the mission became. The roads were uncertain. German units were scattered everywhere. Some were surrendering, some were hiding, some were still fighting. The war had become a broken machine with pieces moving in different directions. Lee's rescue force had to move through that chaos without knowing exactly what waited ahead. When they finally reached Castle Itter, the prisoners saw their rescuers arrive, but relief quickly mixed with fear. The force was small, too small. The castle was old, exposed, and vulnerable to determined attack. The prisoners were important, but they were not trained for this kind of fight. Some were elderly, some were political figures, some had been imprisoned for years. And now, in the final hours of the war, they were suddenly standing inside a fortress that might become their grave. Captain Lee quickly understood the situation. He positioned his men. He placed the Sherman tank near the castle entrance. He organized a defense with whatever he had. Major Gangel and his German soldiers joined the defenders. Austrian resistance fighters were also involved. The French prisoners themselves prepared to help. One of the most unusual defenders was Kurt Siegfried Schrader, a former SS officer who had broken with the Nazi regime and was living near the castle. He also helped in the defense. That meant Castle Itter was now being defended by one of the strangest coalitions in World War II. American soldiers, German Wehrmacht troops, Austrian resistance fighters, French prisoners, and a former SS officer, all preparing to fight the Waffen-SS. Outside the castle, the SS began to gather. These were not men ready to quietly accept the end. They were still armed, still dangerous, still loyal to a dying cause. For them, the castle was a target. The prisoners inside were enemies of the Reich. The Germans defending the castle were traitors. The Americans were invaders. And so, on May 5, 1945, the attack began. Machine guns opened up. Bullets struck the castle walls. The SS fired from the surrounding ground, trying to pressure the defenders and break their positions. Inside, the defenders fired back from windows, walls, and improvised positions. The Sherman tank Besatten Jenny became a key part of the defense. Its gun and machine guns gave the defenders badly needed firepower, but the tank was exposed. The castle was not a modern battlefield position. It was an old stone structure sitting in dangerous terrain, surrounded by attackers who understood that if they could destroy the tank, the defenders would become much weaker. The SS eventually knocked out Besatten Jenny. The loss was serious. Without the tank, the defenders had fewer heavy weapons. The pressure increased, ammunition began to run low. The SS kept firing. The defenders were trapped inside the castle, waiting and fighting, hoping reinforcements would arrive before the attackers broke through. This is the point where the battle became more than strange. It became desperate. The French prisoners were not passive spectators. Some of them took up weapons. These were men who had once argued in parliaments, commanded armies, served in governments, and represented the old French state. Now they were inside an Austrian castle, firing at SS troops in the final days of the war. There was tension even among the prisoners. Some of these French leaders had hated each other politically before the war. Some blamed each other for France's defeat in 1940. Some had spent their captivity arguing about the past. But now the arguments had to stop. The SS was outside. The castle had to hold. Among the prisoners was Jean Barotra, once one of France's great tennis champions. Before the war, he had been famous for speed, energy, and athletic courage. Now, in the middle of the battle, that courage became useful in a very different way. As the defenders ran low on ammunition and the SS attack continued, Barotra volunteered for a dangerous mission. He would leave the castle, slip through enemy fire, and try to reach American reinforcements. It was almost suicidal. The area around the castle was watched. The SS were close. The roads were dangerous. A man trying to escape could be shot before he reached the trees. But Barotra went. He moved through the danger and succeeded in reaching American forces. Then, incredibly, after guiding reinforcements toward the area, he reportedly returned to the battle. It is one of those details that makes the Battle of Castle Itter feel unreal. A French tennis champion imprisoned by the Nazis, escaping through gunfire to bring help to an Austrian castle defended by Americans and Germans against the SS. But that is exactly why this story matters, because real history is often stranger than fiction. Back at the castle, the defenders were still under pressure. Major Joseph Gangel moved through the battle, helping defend the prisoners and coordinate resistance. He had once worn the uniform of Germany's army, but in his final battle, he was fighting against the Nazi fanatics who had dragged his country into ruin. Gangel's decision was not symbolic from a distance. It was physical. It was immediate. He was there, under fire, defending people the Nazis had imprisoned. During the battle, Gangel was killed by enemy fire. He died defending the castle and the French prisoners inside it. His death gave the battle its sharpest human tragedy. He had survived years of war only to be killed in its final hours, fighting not for Hitler, but against the SS. For the people of Wurgel, Gangel would later be remembered as a man who helped protect the town and resisted Nazi violence at the end. But at Castle Itter, there was no time for memorials. The fight was still happening. The SS attack continued. The defenders were still short of ammunition. The castle still might fall. Then finally, American reinforcements arrived. Troops from the U.S. 142nd Infantry Regiment reached the area and relieved the defenders. With stronger American forces now on the scene, the SS attack collapsed. Some SS troops were killed, others were captured, the prisoners were saved. The battle was over, and with it ended one of the most extraordinary episodes of the Second World War. The Battle of Castle Itter was not large compared to Stalingrad, Normandy, Kursk, or Berlin. It did not decide the war. It did not shift the front line in any major way. But it revealed something powerful about the final days of Nazi Germany. By May 1945, the old categories had begun to break apart. Not every German soldier wanted to keep fighting for Hitler. Not every SS man was willing to surrender. Not every prisoner was helpless. Not every rescue came from a large army. And sometimes history creates a moment so strange that enemies become allies because a greater evil is still standing in front of them. Think about the scene inside that castle. A former French prime minister sheltering from SS bullets. A German major fighting beside American soldiers. A Sherman tank outside an Austrian medieval castle. A tennis champion running through enemy fire. A former SS officer helping defend prisoners from the Waffen-SS. A small group of men holding out while the Third Reich died around them. The battle forces us to look at World War II in a more complex way. It was not only a war of nations, it was also a war of choices. In the final days, choices became brutally clear. Some men chose surrender, some chose revenge, some chose survival, some chose fanaticism, and a few chose to risk their lives for people who, not long before, would have been considered enemies. Captain Jack Lee chose to act. He could have waited. He could have decided the war was almost over and that the mission was too risky. He could have told the messengers that help would come later, but he went. Major Joseph Gangel chose to resist the SS. He could have disappeared into the mountains. He could have protected only himself. He could have surrendered and avoided the fight, but he went to the Americans and asked for help. Jean Bouratre chose to run through danger. He could have stayed behind the castle walls. He could have waited for someone else, but he went. And because these men acted, the prisoners inside Castle Itter survived. That is what makes the story so compelling. It is not just unusual, it is human. It is about people caught in the last violent breath of a collapsing regime. The war was almost over, but almost was not enough. Almost over still meant bullets. Almost over still meant SS patrols. Almost over still meant prisoners could be killed before liberation arrived. For the prisoners, liberation was not a clean moment where a gate opened and sunlight poured in. It came through gunfire, it came through fear, it came through strangers arriving at the last possible moment. The fall of Nazi Germany was full of scenes like this. Cities burning, units surrendering, prisoners walking out of camps, civilians searching for food, soldiers trying to reach Allied lines, SS men fleeing justice, resistance fighters emerging from hiding. But Castle Itter stands apart because of who fought there and why. Americans and Germans fought together. French prisoners became defenders. The SS became the enemy of everyone inside the castle. And in that brief, violent moment, the war's moral lines became clearer than its uniforms. A German uniform did not automatically tell the whole story. An SS uniform came much closer. Gangel's men were German, but they fought to save prisoners. The Waffen-SS attackers were also German, but they fought to kill or recapture them. That contrast is important. It does not erase Germany's responsibility for the war. It does not soften the crimes of the Nazi regime. But it shows that even inside a collapsing dictatorship, individual choices mattered. Some chose obedience to evil until the final hour. Others chose to break from it. The Battle of Castle Itter also shows how dangerous the end of a war can be. People often imagine victory as a single moment. A flag raised, a surrender signed, a crowd cheering. But for those on the ground, endings are messy, news travels unevenly, orders conflict. Armed groups keep moving, old enemies cross paths, prisoners wait, civilians hide, and until the last weapon is lowered, death remains possible. On May 5, 1945, the prisoners in Castle Itter were only 3 days away from victory in Europe. But 3 days is a lifetime when the SS is outside your walls. The defenders did not fight for glory. They fought because the danger was immediate. They fought because people inside the castle might die. They fought because waiting could have been fatal. And when the reinforcements arrived, the battle ended almost as suddenly as it had begun. The prisoners were free. The SS threat was gone. The strange alliance dissolved back into history. The Americans continued their duties. The surviving German anti-Nazi fighters faced the ruins of their country. The French prisoners returned to a liberated but wounded France. Some resumed public life. Some carried old political rivalries with them. Some were remembered more than others. But for one day in May 1945, they had shared the same walls, the same danger, and the same need to survive. Castle Itter became a rare story where World War II refused to fit into a simple pattern. It was not simply Allies versus Germans. It was not simply prisoners waiting for rescue. It was not simply a last stand. It was all of these things at once. That is why the story still grips people, because every detail feels like it should not belong with the others. A castle, a tank, a tennis champion, French prime ministers, an American captain, a German major, the Waffen-SS. A rescue mission in the final days of the war. And yet, when placed together, they form one of the most remarkable true stories of the conflict. The Battle of Castle Itter reminds us that history is not only made by massive armies and famous generals. Sometimes it turns on a messenger escaping with a note, a captain deciding to move, a German officer choosing conscience over obedience, a prisoner volunteering to run through enemy fire, a small group holding out for a few more hours. In a war that killed tens of millions, Castle Itter was a small battle. But small does not mean meaningless. For the prisoners inside, it meant everything. It meant life instead of death, freedom instead of execution, rescue instead of disappearance. And for the men who fought there, it became a final test of character at the edge of a broken empire. Nazi Germany was already dying. Its capital was in ruins. Its leader was dead. Its armies were surrendering. But at Castle Itter, the poison of the regime had not yet disappeared. It still had men willing to attack, still had weapons, still had hatred, still had enough strength to kill. That is why the battle had to be fought. Not to win the war was already won, but to save the people who might still be murdered before peace arrived. And maybe that is the most powerful part of the story. The Battle of Castle Itter was not about conquest. It was about rescue. It was about the thin line between liberation and massacre. It was about the final violence of a regime that had lost everything except its cruelty. And it was about the unlikely people who stood against it. When people think of World War II, they often remember the great battles: Normandy, Stalingrad, Midway, El Alamein, Berlin. But hidden near the end of the war is this strange, almost unbelievable fight in the Austrian Alps. A battle where old enemies became temporary allies. A battle where prisoners became participants in their own survival. A battle where a German officer died fighting the SS. A battle where the final days of the war produced one last impossible scene. American soldiers and German troops defending a castle together against the Waffen-SS. And that is why Castle Itter deserves to be remembered. Not because it was the biggest battle, not because it changed the outcome, but because it shows the Second World War at its most human, most complicated, and most unexpected. In the last days of darkness, when the Third Reich was collapsing but still dangerous, a small group of men chose to fight for lives that could still be saved. And inside the walls of Castle Itter, surrounded by gunfire, history gave the world one final strange truth. Sometimes, even at the end of the deadliest war in history, the most unbelievable story is the one that actually happened.